Welcome guys to our chat about data as an asset in the organisation. Mark, Belinda and Andrew, it's great to have you here. So we're just going to have a little chinwag about how data is becoming a real asset in the organisation. I think that's a bit of a given. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nods, good. Yeah. In today's organisation, but actually what we're interested in talking about, perhaps let's start with how senior leaders in organisations are then leveraging that data asset or not, perhaps, as the case may be. Can we start with you, Mark? You were telling us a little bit about that earlier. Could you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so for us, organizationally, we have around 43 billion data points because the business we are in is people insights. And we do that through assessments. We do that through trying to identify trends and scores and benchmarks, and we deliver that to our clients. But really, the 43 billion data points on their own, they mean nothing. Okay. And it's what you can do with that and what are they telling you. So I was saying the story around our leadership program where we took a study around 9,000 leaders to identify the different personality traits that enable leaders to be the right fit for particular organizational challenges or change or digital transformation. For me, that is when data becomes an asset, because the asset is not the data, it's the insight or the outcome it enables you to get to.
Very good. So data alone is worthless, but data as an insight is incredibly valuable if leveraged.
That's my insight around
that's your insight around the insight. And Belinda, your organisation is using data analytics. You're an expert in this area. Using data analytics to drive new business opportunities. Got some examples where you've used that with your other clients?
Yes, of course. So I think we were talking about it earlier. I think right now I can't think of any of my clients that are not interested in becoming data-driven businesses, what we call data-driven businesses. And you almost need to look at the evolution, where they've come from to now. Right now, for senior leaders that I work with, all of them have data on their agenda, and it's really getting their data in the shape that they can leverage analytics, AI on top of that to drive insights, right? And data is becoming an asset to them because actually they're realizing that the business models that they've been historically using to drive their bottom line, to drive their revenue, all of that is changing with data. They're getting newer ones, they're finding ways to make their organizations efficient, they're finding ways to bring in new revenue streams to get more insights on their customers. So across board, it is quite an interesting thing when I say that actually I don't know one client that is not interested or doesn't have data on their agenda, and I'm talking C-level. So it's amazing. Even with Accenture ourselves, we're using data to drive all sorts of insights on our customers, on our people, right? Just to make sure that actually we become a better business. Never mind the fact that actually socially and economically, we're also using data to drive things around, what we do around kind of smart cities, climate change. So data is now everywhere. The fourth revolution I was talking about.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Andrew, you're working with different clients every day, helping them to leverage that data. Yeah. Have you seen any examples where business leaders have had that sort of epiphany moment or have realised, oh my God, there's a new business opportunity here for us by leveraging their data assets? I mean, you're making that happen as a AI genii, as I like to call you. What examples are you seeing where organisations are finding new opportunities?
There's a big problem in people not understanding where that value is. So, Mark's in the position where he's working for a company that realises they do have this data and there are opportunities about it, but connecting those opportunities to the data is actually the biggest challenge people have. So it's people don't know what they don't know. What's the art of the possible with the data, and connecting those two is the really important thing. Once you've done that, it's about understanding, do we have the right data in the organisation? Is it the right format? Is it the right quality? All those sorts of things. And it's only then you can start to then, is the value and what value can we get out of it as well? So, one of my clients manages masts, telecoms masts. They've got 20,000 masts across the country, and each one reports its performance every 15 minutes. So they're awash with all this data, and they're a relatively small organisation. This is the interesting thing, is that you don't have to be a big organisation to exploit data. You could be, only have a few hundred people in your organisation, but if you've got the data, then AI is a good solution for you. So this company, awash with data, unsure what to do with it. So we looked at what the data was available, and there's, for example, ticket data. So when there's problems with the equipment on the mast, etc., the fans, the aircon, the power units, etc., they've got that data, and they've got this smart meter data as well coming in. And if you start to look at the correlation between those two, then you can start to predict failure of these bits of equipment on the masts. And once you can do that, then you can put in preventative maintenance programs, and then you can make sure that your telecoms systems aren't going to go down. Mm-hmm. So for them, the value is huge, because it means they don't have to send engineers out to the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night to fix the masts. But this client had this data, but hadn't done the connection, because they didn't know the art of the possible with what AI can do for you, essentially.
And is it the art of the possible that's perhaps prohibitive on people seeing the value or creating the opportunities? Do we need let's come to you, Mark, because you're very much into people capabilities. Is there a new culture or new capability required to identify those opportunities arising from data that might translate into business opportunities? Are people needing to be more data, savvy, to use another term?
Absolutely. I think the context of where the fourth industrial revolution, the massive amount of data that we are exposed to is, and the lower bar to entry, cloud technologies, the availability of services out there, is these changes are what are now really coming to light, that companies that actually don't use their data, or use their data with their bias, really, are at a disadvantage. And the whole change is actually to step back and understand what the data is trying to tell you, and continuously looking at that. So it's a trait of where we are through the evolution of technology, through the evolution of products out there, and through the accessibility and the opportunity to actually get the acquisition of that data.
Yes, and in your organisation, clearly there's some very sensitive data. So do you find people are sort of frightened of using data, or how they treat that based on the risks associated with personal type data?
Obviously, in our organisation, we're very much data processors. So there is a lot of compliance, there is a lot of security to go with what we can do, or what is done with the data, and the segregation of the data, or the anonymization, so like that it's at an industry level instead of a personal level, is really, really important. Though the ability to actually link that anonymized superset of data with actually specific data to the organization that we would be supporting, that's the real differentiator. And that's what we try to do. And in today's world, that is really critical, because at the heart of every business is the people. It's the workforce that make the business go forward. And technologies out there are just making it easier and more scalable to be able to execute. But the people and the understanding of what type of people, what type of behaviors make good leaders, or what type of behaviors are coming within your talent acquisition pipeline is really critical to enable you to succeed.
We've got to think about two different opportunities. I was really taken by your point about the people, because you can use this data to offer new services to your clients. So you could say, actually, the data that you have in your business, you could offer that as a particular service, and people can access that data, or you can use it to augment your employees' capabilities. And both are equally valid, But the beauty of AI is it helps people make better decisions, doesn't it? So people become almost superpowered by having this additional data and capability driven through that process.
I think this is really interesting. We're having a chat around, AI and where AI is, and the regulation or the bias that and the conversation around, should we trust this or should we make use of it? And that's sort of the pathway we are forging ourselves as new regulations come into play that are there to protect, but also as the technology and the evolution of the machine starts coming into play.
Sure. See, I would approach this quite differently. So you both make an interesting point, but I don't think you necessarily need the AI to drive insights, right? What's different now? Because organizations, we've been collecting data for years and years and years, right? I think what's the evolution, what's really driven this kind of trend forward where, businesses are becoming data driven is around the fact that right now there is that awareness and recognition that data is an asset, but also there is the technology that allows us to be able to compute vast amounts of information, right? And there are the skills now, and then the skills one, it's quite a sensitive one, but now there are skills like data scientists and data analysts that can use the technology and the tools on the data to be able to drive their insights. I think that's what's really driven this change. We need to be very conscious of the fact that actually from an analytics perspective, there's a life cycle. So I think you talked earlier on about, being able to predict. So that example you gave, being able to predict failure of a mass, that's actually a very important one. But where we try to get to from a maturity perspective is the point where we can actually prescribe how things are going to work, because that's when you are actually truly mature. So I've got examples where for some of my financial services clients, they're not now only able to predict when Belinda is going to step up and ask for a mortgage, but they can prescribe that in 5 years using things like my age, my profile, and kind of the things that I'm doing. They can prescribe that actually in 5 years, Belinda is probably going to take out a home improvement loan, or she's going to want to open a trust fund for her child or a savings account, because they've got the data and it's gone from being just predictive, I can tell what you're going to do, to actually prescribing this is how Belinda is going to behave, and making sure they can provide services and they can kind of create services that I'll be interested in. So it's a maturity cycle, but my earlier point is you don't need to have AI, you can just start on the basics, getting the data in the right state, being able to discover it, being able to trust your data. That's the one big thing. Because if you can trust the data, then if you do any sort of analysis on the data, like, take very basic analytics, and you might shoot me for this, but if you were looking at trends in like sales data, as long as you can trust that the data you have, you've been able to amalgamate it, you've been able to consistently, bring it together, you can trust the quality. We call something data veracity. As long as you have that, any decision you make based on any sort of analysis you've done on the data, you can use it to drive your business, and it starts there, right? I think what I find some of my relatively smaller clients are quite put off by is the whole AI, ML becomes a buzzword, and they don't really know how they go from where they are now, where they don't have any of that, to taking advantage of that. And I always say, well, it starts with getting the foundations right. Because I haven't come across an organization that doesn't have a report, for instance, in place, or someone driving a report on how they're doing. So it always starts from there and building on top of that.
It's very interesting, actually, because at the heart of all ML or AI is really the analysis that you do, isn't it? The correlation, the pattern matching, the actually looking at what the data is telling you without actually putting in the bias around it, and then seeing what those correlations are, and then applying mathematical formulas to be able to do that at scale, isn't it?
And it's funny, because you're right, AI is overhyped at the moment.
It is.
And I get people calling me up saying, "Can I have an AI, please?" You know, that's I want to use AI. How do I use it in my business? And you have to tell them, actually, that's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, what are my business challenges and my objectives, and is AI the right solution, or is it actually just some very simple, regression analysis, whatever it might be, or a report, might give you exactly that. So you've got to get it back to that. What's the objective we're trying to meet, and then is AI the right solution for it? And it might not be.
I was going to say, we started this conversation about data, assuming data is an asset, but Belinda, from what you're saying, it's only really an asset if it can be trusted, which is really interesting. And I just wanted to pick up on your point where you were talking about moving from predictive, that step forwards into prescribing. And I know, Andrew, you've got a viewpoint on this, about where we draw the line from collecting data and using it to be more productive or drive new business opportunities into how we prescribe what people do, or we take decisions on that data. Thoughts, Andrew, on ethics?
I mean, just on the prescribing thing, I think that's where it gets a little bit creepy as well. So it's all right to be able to predict equipment failure or whatever. There's examples where if you're in a hotel resort, they can predict what drink you want when you go to the bar and stuff like that. And I don't want that. I want to be able to choose the drink that I want. I might be a bit rebellious. I might have a cider or something, whatever. But you don't want to get to that point where somebody's telling you the decisions that you think you've made. And I think that's a big challenge. If you talk about bias, then obviously, there's risks in terms of whatever you're predicting or whatever you're prescribing, etc. Then it's biased against your particular gender or race or whatever it might be. And so you've got to be very, very careful about how you create those predictive models. There's lots of really good examples out there about bias in data and about how they can be used. One of the ones I was talking about in one of the talks earlier on was a database called Labeled Faces in the Wild, which is used for facial recognition, and Google and Facebook used to use this to train their data on 13,000 faces. And if you look at the even a sample of the data, I think it's 83% of the people in that database are white and 79% are male. So if you're a woman of colour and you're trying to use this system, it's going to be less accurate for you than it is for a white man. And this was only 3 or 4 years ago that big companies like Google and Facebook were using it to train their facial recognition algorithms.
So problematic. And Mark, let's come to you. You're obviously dealing with people data and data about making decisions about how good people potentially are fit for roles and how they might perform. Do you have any concerns about bias, ethics, use of data? Where do you draw the line?
It's really the coming together of science and technology, isn't it? Is behind every decision is a scientific model ultimately, and is a set of studies around the validity of the scoring algorithm that you are employing. There is also the normalization of those scores towards the target group that you're actually assessing. So there is a lot of science that goes into the application of the engine, and once the engine is there, it's also the validation of that through validation studies, and to make sure that the bias is removed.
So you're attending to that, you're cognizant of it, and you're dealing with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do we need, perhaps Belinda, we'll come to you, do we need a new culture in the way that we think about data, especially the changes that might come going forward, the ones you were just talking about as we're moving more maturely towards away from predictive into scary, creepy zone? Do we need to think about a new culture, new education for people dealing with that? What's your experience of existing organisations, the way they deal with that now, and how that might need to change?
So this is actually an interest in the topic of bias and bias in AI, and it's quite an interesting topic. And I was actually on a panel discussing AI ethics or data ethics a while back, and there are tons of examples. A lot of it I think boils down to three things. And I've seen that with some organizations, and I've actually had some clients worried about falling foul of the bias, so, wanting solutions. But those three things, I think it's, the first one is the fact that actually the data, what data are you collecting? Do you trust the data, the foundations? But the second is the people that are writing the algorithms that are acting on the data. So that point in itself is quite crucial. I think that is the point that drives diversity in culture, which is the third point. Because actually, if you have only if you don't have diversity in your organization, chances are the training data and the algorithm you're using is only looking at a specific set. And you look at LinkedIn, there was an example where, and I think it was LinkedIn again, they had created an AI that could tell fit, similar to what you're talking about, Mark. It was almost like, okay, this AI is going to be able to tell when I'm having an interview with you, it's looking at my facial expressions, and it will be able to tell whether actually I'm a good fit or not. The problem is the people that were writing that code and the data they were using was very skewed racially. I think it was gender as well. And so when it came to people of a specific color, all of the predictions and all of the fit metrics were completely incorrect, because actually, and so the company wanted to understand. I think LinkedIn, they were very, they wanted to understand, and it turns out that actually the training data was completely skewed to one direction, to the point earlier on that Andrew made. So if you don't have a diverse culture and that doesn't come across in the sort of data scientists you have, chances are they'll get it wrong. But what organizations are practically doing to address that, believe it or not, is also making sure that you have more AI to look at it, because some of it is, to your point, you couldn't do validity studies on, vast amounts of data that is changing constantly, coming from multiple sources, social networks, things like, semi-structured data like the logs that you're getting from different systems. So what they're doing is really creating the algorithm and the software that will look at the predictions of the AI to be able to tell you that actually there's bias.
Marking its own homework.
Yeah.
Well
That's
done.
what we like.
That's it.
Do you see that too, Andrew?
Yeah,
Is that what you're
absolutely.
saying?
I mean, I think this is generally a good thing, because it's not the same AI that's created the system, so it's not marking its own work. It's a different bit of AI, so it's kind of a different
teacher AI,
yes,
student AI.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's another area, another risk around AI, which is around transparency. So this black box problem that people talk about, and even over the last year or so, people have developed technology to improve transparency of algorithms. That was a big problem. We're still not completely there yet, but AI is helping this whole transparency question as well. So, you just by the scale of these things, you have to use technology to
do it. Can I just say, whilst AI is doing that, we have certain industries and actually regulation in those industries that is driving some of the transparency and obviously the questions. So in one of my previous roles, when GDPR came out, the big thing around actually being profiled. So profiling would be, for instance, a company, credit agency that collects all your information, the bills you've paid and everything, and decides to give you a profile of how likely you are to pay back a debt. Now, when that happens, so when you turn up to a shop or you turn up to a bank and you are denied credit, what is what right do you have as the subject? We call you a data subject because you're the one who's being impacted. What right do you have to challenge that decision, assuming that you've had some fraud or there's something else? So GDPR really says, if you turn up, or say Andrew, you turn up and say to a company, well, actually, I disagree with the risk profile you've given me. Can I see it? How did you get that information?
Yeah.
Most companies won't be able to necessarily tell you because there is a black box. But that regulation is now saying, well, if even you can't tell, you should be able to do manual intervention, i.e. if you turn up and say, well, actually, this period of information that you have is wrong. They should take that information and manually correct it and come up with a new risk score. And so what that is driving is more that conversation and that narrative around how do we make some of the decisions we're making using AI, using various algorithms, how do we make it transparent so that actually data subjects have every right to challenge those decisions?
I think that's really interesting, because what we're talking about here is probably not the things that we typically expect out of a data conversation, but you guys, which is good, you guys have been talking about trusting the data and also diversity in organisations per se to drive unbiased data, which is great, and then transparency. Let's shift, if we may, slightly to how we get benefit for organisations. Mark, we come to you. It sounds like you've been doing some really good work already, and you might have some ideas going forwards. What do you see as kind of the next step for your organisation in leveraging your data assets to bring you new opportunities or new efficiencies? What's next for you?
We're looking at a number of different avenues, from, for example, understanding the different traits across the various organizations we work with that help us to provide indicators, not only of fit, but of success, but not just of success, of areas of development. So, for example, if you're looking, organizations have to evolve. Organizations have to, you either are going to merge, or you're going to expand, or you're going to go into a different industry segment, because that's the nature of business. Yeah, you want to grow. So, am I set up correctly? And is my workforce ready for that change? Now, what makes the workforce ready is the people, the people's behaviors, the people's abilities. And can I actually leverage the investment I have made already in the talent I have in my organization to develop those people into being ready for the next step I want to take? And that is really where we're looking at. That is where we're saying we want to move from being just an assessment provider to a people insight organization. And I think that is really goes back to the data as an asset team. Is you have this information, yeah? When you go and you go through a recruitment cycle, and you go through and take, some organizations use our assessments, and there are a number of competitors out there, but that data then is lost. What if, we can take that data and actually develop an onboarding plan for you to understand, these are your strengths and these are your development areas, and actually come up with a development plan that you can follow to be more successful within your role and to reduce the ramp-up time. What if we can look at, organizationally, these are the people you're going to interact with, where are the difficulties that you're going to have in terms of collaborating effectively? Because as we know, business transformation is all around collaborations and breaking down the silos. So that is some of the thoughts I have. We have organizationally as to where we'd like to take it next.
Sure. And can I come to you, Andrew? I mean, just thinking about trends that you're seeing right now, but maybe you could just sort of future gaze for us a little bit. In the next couple of years, I mean, where do you think organisations will be leveraging data to give themselves competitive advantage, internally or externally?
I mean, I think the opportunity is right across the board. So, we talked about you can use AI to make people more efficient, you can use AI to augment their capabilities, you can use AI to provide new services out of your existing company, and you can even use AI to create completely new businesses, almost like digital twins of your business as well. So there's a whole range of different opportunities for people to go to. And I think where we are now is lots of people are doing lots of proof of concepts in AI. That when you talk about, if you do look at surveys, people say there's lots of AI happening. Lots of AI is happening on quite a small scale. I think people are trying things out. They may be getting, this is going back to Mark's point about how you actually leverage the data. They do a proof of concept. They might get a nice spreadsheet as the output of that proof of concept with some predictions on something, customer churn or whatever. But then that spreadsheet is worthless until it's actually used in the business and action is taken on that business. So the bit that people really need to concentrate on next, I think, is how do you industrialize that whole process? How do you productionize it? So, and it gets, it's almost like the boring part of the conversation is we have to make sure that we deploy the models correctly, that the models are constantly optimized, that the data feeds are secure, that the data feeds are accurate, that information is presented to whoever's going to use that information, is presented to them in a nice way, and then they can take action on that. And that action is where the value is actually realized, but you've got to do all this kind of really boring stuff beforehand to get to that point. So I think there's a realization that it's not about, we'll just develop a quick model and we've got a customer churn model. Actually, how's this going to change the way that the business works? The ways of working within the business are going to have to change. So it goes back to the change management aspects of it, I think.
And Belinda, from your perspective, do you see the leveraging data as an asset being driven by, if I may call it, the business end of a business, or is it being driven by the technology end? I'm just thinking of Andrew's point here, which is like, maybe technologists are saying we need an AI, and then enjoying the proof of concept around the technology. It seems to me perhaps then is the next big challenge, as Andrew's describing, operationalising that and consuming that at the business end of a business. What's your view on that? Tell us.
Well, I think it's the business. It's always the business, and that's our point of view. I always, when I'm having conversations with clients around not even how to use AI or the benefits from AI, but the benefit from data, it's always the business challenge, because that is where we can then understand, okay, what are the use cases? And by use cases, what are the kind of different problems we can solve? We break it down nicely into chunks if possible, but take one, look at it. If it works, scale, industrialize it, move on to the next, because that's when you start to actually leverage, get the benefit out of it. It's some clients, and it's not a very, it's not unique. You have some clients that turn up and say, for instance, I want to build a data lake. And the question is always, well, why? Because it's not the right solution for every size or every industry. So it's always I always try and take clients back to, but what is the problem we're trying to solve? And by that it might be, actually, I think I need to cut down a lot of cost in terms of the cost in my business, the overheads, or actually I want to grow my revenue. I've got an aggressive target, want to get into the C-level, or I want to be very competitive. I've got these new entrants to the market that are threatening my bottom line. How do I innovate, right? So then we start to think, okay, and then we bring our experience of dealing with other clients. So it could be a pharmaceutical, it could be financial services, and there are tons of examples. Or it could be a regulatory challenge. So I'm sure you know that, some of the big banks have gotten fined for onboarding the wrong sorts of clients, or clients that have got kind of like, I don't know, terrorism marks, and they're some of the big banks. That is a problem statement that data analytics and actually AI and ML come in to solve it quite nicely, because we've got very sophisticated assets in that area that we can just plug and play with the client's data. So we always go back to, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the use cases that are applicable? And therefore, how do we start to build what we would tend to, and I'm sure Andrea, everybody knows, what would be pots? You bring a couple of people, different skills together, look at the data, the discovery, the wrangling of the data, the analysis on top of it, test it out. Okay, how would we be able to embed it in a business process? How would we scale it? Because once you do that, then the value becomes obvious, and then you can do other things. So I'd have a client that starts with regulation and thinks, oh, actually, this has worked quite well. Can I apply it to this other business that I have here? Exactly. Yeah. So that's where the value comes in.
Fantastic. I mean, all great ideas. I'd like to finish, if I may. We're coming to the end. I'd like to finish with you, Mark, if I may. For you to say, well, we've had two sort of industry experts here talking about what might happen next and some of those things. Is there something, what would be the biggest blockage for you really consuming the value and the potential out of your data? What's your big thing you've got to solve in the next year or two?
Well, from my perspective is how do I leverage the data in a compliant manner? And how do I do that in a way that is scalable? there are various tactics that can be adopted, but it's sort of getting towards an outcome around it. Also, with the changing nature of the regulation, which is coming and which is evolving. We have states like in the US which are passing now legislation around the use of AI in the recruitment process, and you have the EU with the regulation around GDPR, and it's a changing dynamic which obviously has its challenges.
Yes.
But it also might provide opportunities.
Yes.
to look at.
Okay, thank you very much. All fascinating contributions. I'm really glad again that, apart from lots of referrals to AI, we've not really talked too much about the technology itself, and thank God for everyone. Yeah. So just
it's a data conversation, right? And we've tried to put away the technology.
Yes. So thank you so much for your contributions. Really appreciate it. Been really valuable. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.